the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. Today, I'm lucky enough to be with Elisa Stansel Levine. Elisa, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Yes. Imagine it's the 1950s and you live in a canyon in Northern California, 7 miles from other houses. And somehow, over the course of your life, you leave this canyon and you become a renowned nationwide decorative artist on your own, on your own. And I always planned, even as a very young girl, to write about my life. And eventually I was able to. And it's really the importance of what I have to share has to do with making a life from almost nothing as a single mother, remodeling houses without any training, and then leaping into decorative art and working all over the world for incredible clients at the highest level. This is fascinating and it's exciting, but that's not really the story. The story is that nature saved me. Nature informed my career, and nature is my one trusted companion. And I thought that was my whole story until suddenly we had a fire here on the mountain, and all of my nature girl story was, burned clear through. It wasn't true anymore. I realized my problem had come in life that I had not solved was that I did never learn to trust humans. So then this memoir that I was planning to write and had spent many drafts writing had to be completely reshaped. And that's why I'm here today. I want to talk about writing memoir, and I'm hoping people are interested.
I've got a question. So you had already started writing your memoir, and then there was a fire. Did you actually lose the memoir, or did you realize you just needed to reshape it?
No, nothing in our house burned. We had to run away from our many acres and our horses and everything, and leave things, abandon everything in order to be safe. And when I returned, I realized that, in fact, when leaving the mountain and the one-way road that goes down our mountain, I had never stopped to alert a single neighbor in the middle of the night. And I just had to say, okay, you've said all your life, you're not that interested in people, but look here, at this late date in your life, this is not who you think you are. You think you're this great person who's very giving and et cetera. But in fact, you just, you have a big gap. There's a gap. So when looking at what I had written to date, I had to really think about, could I melt the armor that separates me from other people? And where did this armor come from? Yeah, I had my story. Yeah, I was abused. Yeah, I had this and that that was horrifying. Yeah, my grandmother called me a murderer for the first 5 years of my life. Yeah, my step-grandfather abused me. Yeah, that was all in the memoir. And, yet I wasn't really connecting the dots to how these super early experiences shaped more than just my desire to be with nature, but also my, avoidance of people, humans. So when looking at it, it changed the whole arc and changed the whole theme. There's a new thread now running through, and it's talking about will I learn, will I grow, and when. So that's what happened.
Memoir is so much about creating a reason why your audience needs to hear your story. It's not just that it's an interesting story. We meet interesting people all the time, but there needs to be a reason, a motivation for the audience to pick up the book and to turn the page. It sounds to me like that was the moment when you realized this new thread was the motivation.
Well, Allison, I think the other thing that was very interesting is that the denial that I was living in was pretty interesting, because I was in these graduate classes of creative writing, and I enjoyed them, and I was writing away and thinking I was doing great, even though I was in the middle of my giant career. And one of the other students said, where is the messy part? What happened here? You're not telling us. You start out with these horrible things, and then all of a sudden everything's perfect. Okay, that just doesn't make sense. There has to be a second act. And I'm like, oh, well, Yes, the first 20 years were hard, and the last 20 years are perfect. And the in between was a total business failure and drug addiction. Okay, that's, I liked it. I liked how I was getting out of that area, So, in fact, when you really decide you're going to share and be, giving of your own experience in hopes that it has resonance in another person's life, the reader, you have to be honest. And that whole portion was written in a very wooden way because the business failure was accompanied by the death of my fiance. It was hard. It was a hard time. And probably took me 2 years to face and rework and get, corrected so that it was really integrated into the story. And that was even before the fire. And then the fire, and how I tried to realize things that I could do to forgive myself and to be more connected to my community. That took another 2 years, right? And then it's now. So, yay. I'm working on trust. Yay for me.
Yeah. Well, it's probably something almost all authors share, is this idea that what we say on the page exposes us, and we need to couch our conversations like with the real world versus the page in totally different ways. So as you were writing and discovering more about who you are and your messy parts and what you can share, I imagine that it was just difficult or beyond difficult to expose those parts of your life.
Yeah, well, what was first really kind of fascinating is that I had in the early writing groups that I was in, some women my age were there in the groups, and they would say, how could you remember these things? You were too young. You couldn't possibly remember something when you were a year and a half old. So these kinds of pushback from other writers and my family helped me understand that I needed to write these things in the truth, and yet at the same time in a way that wouldn't trigger the reader to some negative place. It's still almost unavoidable if you're going to talk about abuse when you're a year and a half old, that it's not triggering. But in fact, my experience of it was loving. I thought I was being loved and I was special, okay? And that's kind of horrifying, I suppose, for the reader. And so I just try to take what kernel of the experience at the real time, real place, and write it that way, and not with any kind of judgment, and let them handle it as they could. And it seems to be working. So the pushback you get from other readers, you really need to listen to what's being there's kernels and there's light being shed on something that might make a big difference. And it's okay to see things from a different perspective. When much as you may love your own story or love your lovely words, right? It's like I said in my notes to you, I really don't like it when people say that my writing is lovely. So obviously, it's better to have some kind of pushback and really get a clear interpretation from another reader for me than just somebody saying that was nice, something like that.
I love that you said you were writing without judgment for yourself or for what you want the audience to understand. That is a really interesting place to be as an author. So I'm thinking if I wanted to share an experience with somebody, it has a lot of emotion attached to it for me personally. And yes, there is no emotion attached to it for the audience at the moment, like before they read it. There's no attachment there. It's when they read it. So the idea of writing without judgment is really unique. You really do have to put the emotion, that pain or whatever it is, the joy, the pain, the emotion, you have to put it to the side and just write it in an open way. But that, it really does expose you. Wow. I'm like really excited about this idea of this conversation.
Well, I think look at Annie Dillard. Yeah, I think, I think one of the things that really helped me was the fact that I tend to like witness kind of writing. Annie Dillard, you can write all about a sense of place and all about an experience as a witness without distance. It's a delicate thing, because if you're too much as a witness, it feels too distant. And if you get too emotional and try to sell it, right, that is not okay, in my opinion. If you're trying to share, you don't have to hit somebody over the head with what you're trying to share, and you don't have to make it so hard that they have to walk across the whole room to get it either. Okay, so there's something about being a witness and something about the holy sameness of life. I mean, I can tell you something, and if I'm saying it in a clean and clear and witness-like way that is warm, you will get it. You will find it. And, it won't hurt you, I hope.
Let's talk about creating realistic memories. How did you manage that?
Well, my work, in fact, is so visual. Everything about what I do has always been excruciatingly visual. So my job is to really look at things in proportion and color and value and pattern, and make sure that, and, bring everything into balance. And so this special ability to look and see is also, I have a storehouse of all my memories where I lived along the river, and everything that I learned from nature that I use in my work. So building the memory just requires me to go back to that visual, library that I have, and talk about, any number of things that I'll never forget. And I'm sure we've all said when we were little, this is the best day ever. I will never forget this moment. And then I remember saying that, but I don't remember which moment it was about. And I know I said it a lot, right? So there was some good stuff that I was holding on to, and I could use that in all of these scenes that when I'm looking for any kind of detail, about my grandmother or grandfather, just the jars and jars of canned beautiful blackberries, and how could she can these blackberries that we picked and have them be all whole and perfect in her basement? How could that be? I just don't know. I watched her do it, but if I did it, it would just be a mashed up mess. So these things of witnessing and looking and wondering just make it possible to draw on that kind of thinking from an innocent sort of perspective as a child. And then further, when, all in the art world, it's really something that you need to understand as a collaborator in design, that it's okay not to know. You don't need to know all these details that you think, that you don't have to be fully informed and fully able. What you need to do is just look, And so when you're trying to design a color or maybe even design a scene, you just have to ask what is wanted, not what is wrong. Okay, please do not ask what is wrong. It'll take you a long way around. Okay, with what is wanted. And so in the same thing, in a paragraph, in a sentence, in a whole chapter, or even a whole book, what is wanted, and see if it's there.
Did you have trouble?
Did that answer that?
Yeah, it was very good. I liked it. I liked it. Did you have trouble talking about people in your life?
Oh, certainly. I didn't tell anybody about my grandmother or my grandfather until I was 35. Okay. So this happened from the time I was a year and a half till I was 5.5. And so that sort of indicates there was a problem. And my mother was a therapist, and my father was a self-made super, I don't know, what do you call it? Thought he was like Dean Martin or something. He was hard, I call him the glass mountain. You couldn't really get anywhere with him. And then with my mother, she was just, I don't know, timorous and strange. So there was no point in telling them as far as I could tell. But later I had a therapist, and they said, well, gee, why didn't you tell your parents? And I said, I don't know. So I went home and called them. They were divorced by then. I called my father, and he said, and I told him, and he said, well, what are you going to do now? Sue me? And I'm like, what does it have to do with you? Jesus, And then with my mother, she just was very quiet. And then she said, are you sure? And I'm like, oh, my God. Okay, so this is why I didn't tell you to, right? I said to myself, there's no protection. There never has been, and there's not going to be. So goodbye. And the only other person I talked about it with was my cousin, who had the same experience. She was a year younger, and she was next in line to be abused in the same way, except for the murderer part. She's in the book, and she's all okay with me sharing everything about it, thankfully, because it really is. She was my best friend. And then I didn't really ever talk about it again until I met my husband when I was 38, and probably didn't tell him about it until I was maybe for 2 or 3 years, maybe 4. It was a long time ago, right?
And then you put it in a book.
Yeah. It's very. What's problematic is it's very upsetting to my son and my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandchildren are 27 and 25 years old now. I'm 72, so they're fine with the fact that I felt a desire and a need apparently to write this, but they can't get past a certain chapter. And I said, why don't you just skip that chapter? That's the only time it's mentioned. Read further. There's good stuff in there. It's fun. There's happiness. There's joy. Give me a break. It wasn't just that. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes you worried about sharing these things, like whether you were a drug abuser or you, couldn't cope with grief or you were abused, that you will only be seen as that. And it's been really wonderful that decorators and, these people I work with all over the world who have read the ARCs call me crying and are so happy and they're overjoyed. They just love the book. Okay. And they love it. They just think it's really luminous. So I guess it's not horrible, to share. Right.
Did you feel the need to put on a thicker coat of skin because you put everything out there?
No, that was the weirdest thing. I mean, 2 things happened, even with these podcasts that I'm doing. One was, and I think it's a typical, okay, as a self-taught person who did not graduate from high school, who was a single mother, who, blah, blah. The fraud syndrome is easily accessed. You have to be on the lookout for that because it just gets in your way. It gives you nothing. So when looking at how I was going to react to the fact that I was being published and the vulnerability, I was lucky because in the She Writes Press group, all the women that were being published at the same time, 5 of us got together and we can share our own vulnerability and talk about it and talk it through as we were progressing in this long 2-year slog to publication. And that was hugely helpful. And then in addition, when this podcast opportunity came up, it was like, oh my God, one of them was the best advice, and I was supposed to give advice. And I'm like, I was like acting like I didn't like to give advice. Well, obviously I do like to give advice, Allison. It's like, why would I be unhappy? This is what I always said I wanted. So, really just stop it and get out there. And that's how I had to deal with it. So yes, it comes up and you have to slay it. That's it.
Yes, you have to slay it. Absolutely. Elisa Stansel Levine, I have been enjoying this conversation. How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, I have a website. It's just my name, elisastansellevine.com. And on there's all the Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, you can do. I'm on LinkedIn. I like it there. I have a blog. You can access that through the same website. And of course, there's all about the book on that. And the book is available for pre-order. It comes out June 7th. The title, by the way, of the book is This or Something Better. So I hope people like it and read it.
Well, I've had the opportunity to see the cover, and it is absolutely beautiful. So I look forward to reading it.
Thank you, Allison. I really enjoyed our conversation so much.
Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yeah, I was thinking we might not have them, so I'm ready.
Mountain or beach?
Oh, mountain.
What is your favorite go-to relaxation activity?
Hiking.
Hiking, nice. And if you had to pick up a baked good at a delicatessen this afternoon, what would it be?
Gluten-free carrot raisin muffin.
Okay, now I got to go get one of those. That sounds really good.
They are really good.
We've gone gluten-free in this house as well. So I am totally versed on how to prepare gluten-free meals. So
it's so much easier now than when I first realized I was allergic to wheat in 1975. Okay, there was nothing, you just had to eat.
I can only imagine. Yes, we've been on this diet for a year, so I've learned many things. But it's pretty easy now. And you've got lots of support groups out there. So anyway, Elisa Stansel Levine, I am so glad that you've been able to stop by.
Yes, it was really my pleasure. I really love your podcast, and I look forward to, publicizing it everywhere when it comes out. And I will check in on you and listen to other great tips from writers. I love it. Thank you, Allison.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. Allison out. Boom! We're all done. Elisa Stansel Levine grew up beside the American River in Northern California, a few miles from the site of the California Gold Rush. Her mid-century childhood she likens to a cross between American Graffiti and Deliverance. She left school at 16 and, as a teen mother, earned a degree from a community college. Her book, This or Something Better, is scheduled for release in June of 2022. For more information on Elisa, visit her website at elisastansellevine.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association and the exciting events we have coming up, please visit floridawriters.org. Until next time.